Minute or two to everyone to get their audio on and start record. So that would be a really good idea.
Yeah.
One quick technical note.
Recording in progress.
Since you're doing the portion of the screen share, it might be good to turn off browser or desktop notifications because one of them popped up above your screen share.
Shoot. Okay. Thank you for that, because I actually don't know how to turn those off.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
The tech challenge starts again. I can at least turn off my WhatsApp for now.
The downside to that type of share.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ashanti.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to Beginning to End, a creative process conversation today. We are all getting settled in, making sure everything's running. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves. I'm going to give you guys 1 more minute for people to filter in, and then we will go. Does that sound good to you, Jessi?
Sounds great. Thank you.
All righty. There's always people at the last minute, and I hate for them to miss your introductions. No.
Lovely panelists welcoming everyone.
Yeah, I should do an icebreaker in the chat.
Oh, yeah. I know we've been going with the comics people have been reading lately. Has
always
that
a good one.
Overused?
I think it's always a good one.
Nice.
All right, we're at 102. So everyone, again, welcome to Beginning to End, a creative process conversation. I'm gonna go ahead and pass this along to Jessi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Rivka. Thanks, everybody, for coming today. My name is Jessi, and I'm a staff member of the Cartoonist Cooperative and one of the organizers for NIF. And I have the absolute pleasure of moderating today's conversation with these fantastic artists. We have Ashanti Fortson, pronouns are they, them, whose works include Leaf Lace, Shades of Fear, Crescent Petra, Smallness, and The Broken Heart at the Center of Comics. We have Blue Delliquanti, pronouns they, them, of O Human Star, Meal, Adversary, Across a Field of Starlight, and Love Triangulation.
Oh, Jessi, do you want to go to the panel with the little introduction?
Thank you.
Yeah,
my nerves are getting me. Thank you so much. We also have Jasmine Walls, pronouns she, her, of BROOMS, VIXEN, NYC, Midst Valorous, The Last Session, Snow White and the Unevil Queen, and Scene, Edmonia Lewis. And we have Kody Okamoto, they, he for pronouns, of Keeping Time, Demon Boy, Rubber Match, and When I Was Young. And we're going to hear from each creator a bit today about their process of creating comics. And then we're going to chat a little bit as a group together. And then we're going to wrap up the event with a Q&A from our live audience here on Zoom. So if you have any questions, please hold them until the end so we can make sure we get them all in the chat. And just a reminder that the event is being recorded. So if you need to step away at any point, you'll be able to watch it on YouTube later. And we'll also be sure to share how to follow folks' work at the end of this event too. So if you don't catch their websites now, especially with a shortened preview of that, they will be back up later. And we're going to get started with Ashanti. Ashanti Fortson is an award-winning cartoonist, illustrator, comics editor, and color designer for graphic novels. Their work explores the rifts and connections between people. They are deeply interested in textiles, which I appreciate very much, and their love for color is a thread that runs through everything they make. Ashanti lives in a mushroom with their spouse, their cat Miss Cheese, and at least 3 adorable pet rats at all times. Take it away, Ashanti.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. I'm going to start us off with a little bit of discussion about reference sheets. So these are not always something that I incorporate into my process, but since it is a kind of nice opportunity to showcase various aspects of my varying comics process, I thought I'd include these. They're from my upcoming graphic novel, Crescent Petra, which is a YA near future sci-fi about a undiagnosed autistic non-binary teen who befriends a sapient, fully autonomous android, and they kind of navigate together what it means to be human. And it's a full-length graphic novel where the characters wear a lot of outfits. And I decided in my concept art process stage for this project that it would be really helpful to put together just like an outfit sketch sheet for each character. These are pretty old. They're from 2020 because the process has been an extended one. But even though they're pretty old, it's been very helpful to have these in the penciling stage of the comic. I labeled each of these not with the chapter or the page count, but the page where they show up, which is, I think, the biggest flaw of these character sheets, and definitely something that I would do differently next time. But I think that's an interesting and iterative part of my process. It's just kind of like learning the different nuances of what is helpful when and where. Because these aren't labeled, I've had to do also a lot of improvisation in the process, which I think has kept a bit of life in the design process for me. So it's not kind of all locked in right here. It is pretty iterative, and there are cases where I've scrapped an outfit entirely and like done something else, and or used it as a jumping off point and done something else. But having these as kind of a baseline has been really helpful in keeping things consistent and also not having to design too much on the page, because that tends to slow me down when I'm doing character designs, setting designs, which we can actually move on to the next slide for that. These are some setting reference sheets for the same project, Crescent Petra, which I also did before starting pencils. Having these kind of laid out really helps me in speeding up my process for pencils especially, but also, composing things in the layouts and thumbnail stage, and then certainly kind of working through the final art as well. It's been really helpful to have, especially these setting reference sheets, to kind of look different angles, different rooms that are important, and certainly they all came in very handy in the penciled page on the left, where there's the cross section of the house. If I didn't have like the little room reference sheets for this house, that page would have been a complete nightmare. But because I did, it was only a little bit difficult. I think that in whatever way is helpful for someone's process, like establishing settings, either like this, or some people use different techniques, whether it's like 3D models or taking photos and kind of working from there, giving yourself the tools to make your future self have an easier time, I think is really valuable in comics, because each stage is pretty thought intensive. And the more you can make things efficient for yourself or easier for yourself kind of down the line, being nice to your future self, I suppose, is valuable, and something that has been pretty difficult for me to pick up over the years, but we're getting there. Let's move on to the next slide, because this is for Leaf Lace, a short comic. And my project process for short comics tends to be a little different than for longer projects. It's a lot more kind of looking at the whole thing, the whole scope of the project in one bird's eye view. So you'll see here that I have initial concept art for the story. This was just a quick doodle that I did when I was thinking about the idea for the story. And Leaf Lace is about the goddess of fate who like spins the life threads of mortals, falls in love with a mortal woman, and fast forward to when the mortal woman is old and is dying, and the goddess doesn't know how to deal with that because she's immortal. So it's about love, it's about grief, it's about loss, and the concept art, which I don't think I've ever shown anywhere, maybe, was really just about getting the color for the story. And I don't mean that in a literal sense necessarily, though a lot of these colors do still show up in the final comic, but rather the feel of the piece. Because I was working with an editor on this, my thumbnails were a lot more polished than they sometimes are. We're not going to the next slide yet, but on the next slide, you'll see a very loose thumbnail in comparison to these. But I really kind of, again, an overview of the comic, everything laid out on the same canvas so that I can look at how everything works together, how everything flows, how everything connects with the short comic scope in mind. And along the same lines, I do that same kind of planning for color. So on the right hand of the screen, there's some pretty loose color keys that I put together after my inks. I do color keys for every project with their detail and kind of in-depth degrees varying from project to project, but the goal is to have an overall color plan and emotional arc for the entire project, for the entire comic. For page 1, it's like a lot more detailed. Like there's like the character's skin tones, the basket color, there's like different colors that I'm working with. But for the rest of the pages, I just kind of did, this panel feels like this color. This panel feels like this color. This page feels like this color. Ultimately, the colors don't align 100% with the final artwork, but it's more for me to kind of get a sense of, this is the vibe of this panel, this is the vibe of this page, so that when I take it to full color, I can communicate that vibe. So this is like really a note to myself. But for page 21, you'll see, if we go to the next slide, you can see kind of my my pencils to inks to color process for this page specifically. And what I want to point out on this page, on this slide rather, is that the inks in the middle look really, really overwhelming. Like it's super hard to parse in a lot of places, and especially in that bottom panel. But because I'm working with that color key that I shared on the previous slide, I know what everything is going to look like in final when I'm making it. I know what the color is going to be. I know where the color holds are going to be as well. I know what the balance of the page or the panel is going to feel like in final. So when I'm inking, even though it looks kind of very indecipherable, to be honest, at this stage for this page at least, I already have that color plan in my head for, this is going to come forward, this is going to be pushed back, this is going to be this color or that color. But I think it's fun to kind of see how that stage of color and color holds really makes the inks read quite differently than they do at the solo ink stage. But we can go to the next slide to wrap my section up. This is another kind of short comic process moment for the HUE of Heaven, which was my comic in the Shades of Fear anthology, which I co-edited with Allison O'Toole, a fantastic comics editor. And you'll see on the left a little thumbnail that was one of the thumbnails I sent to her because she was the one who reviewed my comic for the anthology. And I just want to say shout out to her for reading my thumbnails, because I let myself go a little bit with this one because I know Allison, and just want to say thank you for the trust, Allison, because that's a very loose thumbnail. But you can see how I kind of take it to final here as well, with the sketch laying everything out, and then once again my inks being quite heavy with that future color plan in mind. Though I do also want to note something important in my process, not so much color related, is that I lay out the text, placeholder text in pencils. Yeah, as someone in chat just noted, I place text in pencils because I need to know how much space it's going to take up. And if I'm kind of drawing around it, I don't want to underestimate how much space I need for that text. So every single comic I make, I put the text in pencils. And then I pencil around the text and I make adjustments from thumbnails to pencils with the text in mind. But then I get the hand lettering in this comic within the ink stage, and then into color. So the image balance, kind of the overall color hierarchy that I have in mind throughout the process, doesn't show up until the last stage, which can make it really feel like, what am I doing wrong? This comic looks so ugly as I'm doing it, and then I get to color and I'm like, oh wait, okay, I'm good. I had to trust in the process, but it happens every time still. So much to learn always. An ever evolving comics process, which I think keeps things fun, keeps things interesting. But that's all I've got for my section, and I would love to pass it back to Jessi.
Thank you so much, Ashanti. This is really cool. I know I've told you, but Leaf Lace is one of my favorite comics that I've ever read because of just how gorgeous it is, and like all the thought that you put into your comics really shows, and it's wonderful to get a peek into how you approach your comics. Thank you for sharing. All right, let's move on to Blue Delliquanti. Blue Delliquanti is a comic artist and writer based in Minneapolis, and they teach comics courses at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. From 2012 to 2020, Blue drew and serialized the Prism Award-winning science fiction comic Oh Human Star. Blue is also the creator of graphic novels and novellas like Meal, Across the Field of Starlight, and Adversary, as well as a contributor to several Iron Circus comics anthologies. Take it away, Blue.
Thank you, Jessi. Okay, so the way I've organized my slides is chronologically, because I find that the developmental work that I did for a lot of my bigger comic projects is pretty distinct to each project. And so I figured I would give some focus on that. But I will talk a little bit about my step-by-step for getting a page complete in the last slide or two. So I'll start by talking about the project that I've worked on for, I suppose, the longest, Oh Human Star, which was a webcomic I did for 8 years. What I find really fun about reflecting on the developmental work I did is that you can kind of tell this is the first big project I ever did. A lot of my influences for figuring out what this comic would be like and how I would develop it were Tumblr webcomics and webcomics I was reading at the time. So I was really informed by the developmental materials that people would release publicly. And that helped me get a sense of what I wanted to nail down before I started making the piece. And then there were other things that I let develop over time. So over time, that included character designs, which I tried to get down early, things including particular props and details that would show up over time with characters. What's funny about one of these character designs is like, Al never wears this coat. I don't know why I drew this coat. Never wore it. But there are a few key set pieces in A Human Star that occur repeatedly, and one of them is the home of Al's partner, Brendan Pinsky. And so I I was referring to a few different kinds of materials. At the time, my family had a subscription to Dwell magazine, which has a lot of like swanky modernist um, uh, home designs. So I was referring to those for layouts, for color palettes. We'll put an asterisk on that, and a couple of other materials and components. So I tried to get a sense of how the room would be laid out, where everybody would navigate through the house, what would fit, to help me get a sense of how much room people would truly be operating in, working in this space. You can go to the next slide, please, Jessi. The thing that I find really interesting about my work on Oh Human Star, looking back on it now, is something that I find is quite particular to my creative process, which is that when I tend to ideate and develop a story, the things that come to me first are very specific scenes. Very rarely do I come to a project with a general theme or idea or story outline as a whole. A lot of times there will be like one scene or a few key scenes that I want to build the rest of the story around. And a lot of these scenes honestly stay intact for the entire run of the project. There are things that I drew in 2011 that did not see their final form until 2019. And that's not to say that like I never interrogated them or, you know, gave them an edit or referred to things that existed in the development process since then. But I find that that's very interesting to reflect on, is those are the things that I like pin in to like grow the outline around them. So these are some like Photoshop documents from like 2011 that I screenshotted here. Another thing worth pointing out is that a lot of these like rehearsals are in color, which is not what Oh Human Star is in. Oh Human Star is in a limited color palette that I eventually nailed down with the document that I screenshotted on the top right. I ended up going with a roughly two-tone palette that refers to the two timelines in which the story takes place. There is a past timeline that is scenes taking place primarily in like the early 2000s. And then there is the present timeline, which takes place in the near future of 2021, and that's the blue. So I tried to figure out how these colors would operate on different elements of a character, their hair tone, their skin tone, their basic outfits that would, for Al especially, remain unchanged from timeline to timeline, and just making sure that the values still played nice with each other and that they worked consistently. And so I basically color picked from this Photoshop document for the entirety of those 8 years. Is it the most technically slick process ever? No, but it did work for me quite well. And I did refer to these sorts of things in different aspects when I moved on to other projects. Jessi, if you can go to the next slide, please. So after Oh Human Star, I worked on projects of different scopes. I worked on Across a Field of Starlight as a graphic novel for Random House Graphic, which was one of the first major projects that I collaborated with an editor on. Honestly, this was one of the like mainstream projects where I was working with a lot of people in the process: an editor, pre-press technician, folks who were looking and referring to my work as I worked on this project over time. So I tried to be much more tidy and consistent with the developmental material so that people could see where I was going, what I was doing. So for Across a Field of Starlight, there was a color key for characters in different set pieces that, for the sake of this book, involved entirely different lighting schemes, different color families. And so I tried to keep those consistent across different scenes. But that was a fairly standard cell shading color scheme where I wasn't trying anything too elaborate. Now, Adversary, which was a personal project that I was working on the back half of my time working at Across a Field of Starlight, that was a much more convoluted process because I was trying to go for very specific color style that is informed by risograph, like the layering and the texture of risograph, but is entirely digital. I stumbled across the look that I wanted, but because this is a project that took, the better part of, I don't know, 7 or 8 months to do, I needed to write notes for myself, notes to future me, so I would know not only what color palette I'm choosing, like it from the color picker. I knew what settings to set the different layers on, and what order the layers had to be laid down, because this is something that I found out. If I put the layers on in any order different from what I chose, then the colors would be slightly off, and it would lead to an inconsistency that was extremely frustrating. So if I'm parsing these old notes correctly, I have a line art layer. I have the warm tone layer that was these two, there's like a pink and a peach that I put down to 85% on multiply. I had a noise layer that started as 2 different gray tones that I changed to a noise layer on Clip Studio. This is something that just comes with my version of Clip. So it creates these kind of noisy, gritty textures on the far right of the screen. And then over top of all of that, I have 2 blues that would result in some really interesting flesh tones, some interesting purple and like darker warm colors, and then some cool that created a interesting play off of each other that I liked, but I had to keep straight for the better part of 60 to 70 pages. Let me see. Oh, okay. If we go to the next slide, we can also talk a bit about some of the developmental work I did for Across a Field of Starlight, which is a space opera. So I was not only doing character designs and color palettes for characters, but I was also doing a lot of developmental work for tech. And for someone who does a lot of science fiction, designing technology is not my specialty. So I had to do a lot of studies and references from multiple angles to make sure I understood the shape language, especially things like vehicles. Vehicles are the bane of my existence. I don't know why I did this to myself, but I tried to break it down into shapes that were references to existing vehicles, so I could understand how they worked. I had a new vehicle. The one on the right is a spaceship that I had to design intact and then destroy into 2 distinct halves. That was fun. I have also a vehicle that is like an RV-sized spaceship that I had a Google SketchUp. Yeah, that's what it's called. A program called Google SketchUp, where I designed the interior so I could move things around, I could keep things consistent. But the exterior, I actually worked with a spaceship designer named Jeff Sugale, who does lots of like science fiction concept art. I gave him a general design like for the shape of the thing I wanted, and he basically made it a little more coherent as a tech object. He added a lot of in science fiction, you sometimes hear greebles, which are the little like details and things that you add on to a shape to make it seem more complex than it actually is. So he 3D printed this guy for me. It's like the size of an apple, so that I could take pictures from various angles in a way that allowed me to come up with different angles for panel layouts that were a little more adventurous maybe than what I might have done if it was just digital materials. But yeah, that is something that I knew I had to make that a big part of my developmental process so that I had all the materials I would need to do the best page layouts and most adventurous layouts I could think of. Let me see, how am I doing on time? Oh, I'm doing good. Okay. Now we can go to the next slide, and I can talk a bit more about what my process from start to finish looks like through my most contemporary project, which is a short comic I did last year for a short box called Bleed Any Percent. This is another science fiction piece. This is something where I stuck to my typical process in most ways, but I was still experimenting with a technique for coloring and texture that I hadn't done before. But before I get into the new stuff, I can talk a bit about how my general process works. At this point, I've refined the process that I've done since Oh Human Star, where I start with a general outline that usually grows organically from those like scenes where I was like, oh, that's a good scene, that's a banger. I'm gonna like make sure the story is cohesive to make that fit in there. That is a stage that I actually do traditionally. I will have a sketchbook dedicated to each project where I will iterate on scripting and thumbnailing a whole bunch until I'm satisfied with what I want. That keeps me from being too precious about the final results. And then when I have my thumbnails either scanned or photographed, I will bring them into Clip Studio, which is my program of choice these days. And I have a template that I will develop for a specific project, usually just to make sure that the proportions of the page are correct. I have a couple of templates that for projects that have used all the same page proportions. So I may grab from a previous project, tweak the page layout templates, but they're all roughly the same. That allows a unique kind of texture and tooth to the panel borders. It's how I keep track of flow lines from panel to panel, and it lets me iterate on this 9-panel grid to make different stages of tiers and stuff. So I will pencil my pages digitally with my photograph thumbnails as a base. That is what we see on the left there. I've got pencils, excuse me, what's the word I'm looking for? Lettering. Much like Ashanti, I have the lettering in early because I want to make sure that the lettering is not fighting the composition of the page and that I can get that flow correctly. The reader's eyeball is going through the page in a particular way. You can kind of see how I'm thinking about diagonals at this penciling stage where the reader's eye flows in that bottom panel from like the top left where we have the security officers down to the character hiding behind the potted plant. I'll plan that out in penciling. Then I go to inks. For this, I used a brush by the artist Maddie Gonzalez called Leaky Head Wound that I'm very fond of. It's got a nice kind of pencil-y, charcoal-y scritchiness to it that I like a lot. I also use a dithering brush that I got off of the Clip Studio Marketplace that I adore. So I stuck with a fairly flat inking style that is either just white or just black. And then I am using a color that is a like light tannish cafe au lait brown that is the base tone, like the screen tone, such as it is for the project. But then I am adding a layer of slightly more complex coloring that is happening on the last part over on the right. Bleed 80% is a story about a speedrunner, a video game speedrunner in the future who is using haptic and audio technology to run a augmented reality video game in a underground mall. So she is like navigating with stuff that only she can feel and hear, but nobody else can. So there's this idea of a layer that nobody else can perceive. So I have this consistent pattern and texture layer overlaid over every page that interacts slightly with the spot black and interacts slightly with the brown screen tone. And in pages that I don't showcase here, there is a much more reinforced version of that layer that shows sort of what the main character is interacting with. So I got very into the weeds with the texture that interacts with the line art I did for this, but I think it turned out pretty okay. So that is essentially what I'm working on. The only other thing I haven't covered, oh yeah, I have a pattern that I use for the main character's t-shirt that I mark out in the inking stage, and then I put on the final in the finishing touches stage. But that's about it. Yeah, I'm usually trying to come up with something new for each project that I do, but I have streamlined my process work in a way that stays relatively consistent from project to project. So those are my slides for the most part. So I'm ready to kick it back off to Jessi.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Blue. That was really cool. And I feel like I learned so much during your background presentation, and now again with your attention to detail always shines through in your work. So thank you very much for sharing. And now let's move on to Jasmine. Jasmine Walls is an award-winning writer, editor, artist, and hot chocolate enthusiast based in California with a passion for inclusive and self-indulgent stories that are fun, engaging, and critical. She is the owner and operator of Bone Dust Press and has done work with Levine Querido, DC, Webtoon, Mad Cave Studios, Boom Studios, The Atlantic, and The Nib. Take it away, Jasmine.
Thank you so much. I draw, but I mostly write, especially with a lot of longer projects, a lot of the stuff I've had published. So what I'm going to talk about and what I'm going to focus on is approaching graphic novels and longer form stories as a writer rather than the focus on the art. And when it comes to developing stories, actually, I'm very similar to Blue in that sense, where I usually have a scene or a few scenes. Usually, there's some sort of dumb joke, and then I'm just like, how complex of a world can I build to make this one specific joke happen? And so to start, when I start developing a story, I will often like sketch out character designs or like very specific elements of this world. I'm going to focus on Brooms just so we can kind of see from beginning to end like how we move through. So you'll see on the screen there's a couple of like concept sketches from 2018 or so, I think, of Billy May, who at the time was very much my focus as sort of like the main character, which then grew into a whole cast. I'm a super visual thinker. So sketching out the characters so I have something to like focus on helps me really kind of nail down a level of detail that I can then apply as I'm writing the story. At this stage, it's all like, my room looks like a conspiracy theory board. I'll have sticky notes everywhere. I've got little ideas written in 5 different notebooks. I've got sketches. And it's just, for me, it's the fun part because I get hit with this story idea and then it's just, I can put down all the ideas, everything. I'm like, what can we fit into the story? What would be cool in this world? It's just, you just bombard yourself with it until you have what feels like enough of this chaotic lore to sort of then actually build some structure out of. And then I'll have a very, very loose concept of a plot. I'll have these like chunks of scenes I want to see, and then I say, okay, how do we make this coherent? We just shoveled in all the ingredients, and I'm like, all right, how are we gonna go and cook this? So, if you want to move on to the next slide, when it comes to outlining a script, the challenge is taking that just chaotic mess of ideas and bits and pieces that are everywhere and actually putting them together into something that somebody else could conceivably look at and maybe understand what's going on. So what I do is I take all the scenes that I'm like, these, I really want them. I want them in the story. I think they're going to be, sorry, you might hear my dog. Delivery trucks are in his existence. But you take each of those chunks that you really, really want in the story, and then you sort of build them into a timeline. Put them in. Loose. Thank you. Set them in order. And the way that I write is probably not the way that most people do. I tend to do a lot of outlines. I tend to do a very, very rough synopsis, and then I go back in and and I put in a sort of beat sheet where I'm like, these are the emotional chunks that I want the story to happen, and then I do another one that is page by page so that I know exactly how many pages this book's going to be, and then I go into that and I do panel by panel, and I put all that work in at the beginning specifically because at the very end, usually I've been staring at the story for so long, I'm kind of like, you hit that point in any project where it's just like that push to get through to the end, and you've been looking at it so long, you're like, oh God, I'm a little bit tired of this no matter how much I love it. And because I did all that work, like everything's broken down. Every single panel has its own summary. I know exactly what's happening on each page. I know exactly where those emotional beats are, So at that point, when I'm the most exhausted, because it's like things aren't done yet and they don't feel satisfying yet, but they're also like, I have a lot of work to get there and I can't like slack. So having all that work done ahead of time is super, super helpful to me, because then I can go and I'm like, oh, all I have to do is like make this little panel sound better, add in the, add in any like specific character dialogue, like traits, and format it into a way that is acceptable to send to an editor. And to me, that I found, even though it sounds like that's way more steps, it has sped up my process for writing so much, because I don't feel like I'm going in and having to build something from scratch if I've stepped away from a project for a while and come back like, oh geez, where was I? Everything's right there. Everything is neatly laid out. As someone who sometimes gets very easily distracted, I need that. And then alongside that very like technical aspect of it, I have what I like to call the glow up of the script. And that's when you're adding in, because in that chaotic stage is also when you're not just slapping down ideas, but you're gathering a ton of research. I love to do research for books. I do a lot of stuff that has either very specific focus or is on a very specific historical period. So I do a ton of research and I just sort of like pile it all into a folder. I've got 50 bookmarks going on. And once I've laid out my my first couple of outlines, I will go in and I apply, and I'm like, okay, is any of this factually incorrect? Like, how can I apply this research that I've been doing and make sure that it's actually going into the script in a way that matches the story? Am I, if it's not factually correct, did I intend for it to be factually incorrect? I want to make sure that all those choices are intentional. The second thing I do, remove dialogue. And I tell this to anybody who's writing a script. Look at the first round of dialogue you do, you can scrap usually at least a third of it. Go back in, get rid of some, and then go back in and do it again. Whenever I edit, one of the first things I tell writers, because I get a lot of script writers coming in before they get to the artist, and one of the first things I do is, all right, we're gonna love this dialogue, cut it in half. Because a lot of stuff, it's surprising how much you can stay with the same amount of information without having to say it out loud. I always tell writers, I'm like, remember, the artist is also telling the story. So much of this can be visual. So think about the dialogue. Are they saying what's happening? And can we see it? If we can see it, you don't need to say it. So that's going to be super, super helpful. I mean, that's something I do, is I always try and watch out how much dialogue I'm putting in. I always check my formatting. One of my goals as a writer is to make it as easy as possible, because I'm at the very first step of this collaborative process. There's a whole team behind it. Or if it's just you, make it easier for your future self. If you're writing out a script fully, especially if this is going to like an editor and going to another artist, make sure it's easy to read, make sure it's easy to parse, make sure your formatting is super clear. Take a specific kind of script that you like to write and stick with it. Don't go back and forth. Stick with it, at least through that whole project. And then pacing and action economy. It's one of those things where, again, this is especially for writers who are working with other artists, one action per panel per character. And I know that sometimes I get scripts and I look at them, and even in my own, I'll be, I'm doing my first couple drafts and people are doing 5 different things. And I'm like, all right, Jasmine, let's narrow this down. Everybody gets a singular action, and not everybody needs to be doing an action on every panel. That's just chaotic. It's because it'll just confuse the eye. And then pacing. For me, I often like to compare when I have writers who are pretty new to writing comics and they come in and I'm editing their work. I'm like, think of pacing a bit like being on a roller coaster. You'll have high action moments. You'll also have build up moments, like when you're going up that roller coaster and you hear that click, 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 and you're like, you're ramping yourself up for that drop. And then there's also parts where they're just fun and smooth. And I think comics, the way that a narrative is similar, in that if you want to have a high impact moment in a script, you have to have those moments where you have the buildup. You can't, if it's all high action, then it's not as impactful. If it's nothing but like, you know, high octane from start to finish, it feels one tone, even though there's a ton happening, because you didn't have that buildup and you don't have that downtime. So pacing is kind of like, for me, my bread and butter of storytelling is I love going into pacing. I love having those different moments and being like, how can we make this moment more impactful? Or how can we have this one be just as emotionally devastating, even though almost nothing's happening? How do we do that? Yeah, all right, we can move to the next slide. All right, and then since I'm focusing on being a writer, collaboration, comics is collaboration, even if it's just you. Even if it's just you, you're collaborating at some point. You know, it's not something you can do solo. I mean, making them, you can make them solo, but you need that audience. Otherwise, you just have a comic that sort of exists in a dark box. But especially when you're working with a publisher, or you're working with like just on your own, working with an artist. So much of it is about collaboration. And I always like to remind people, and one thing that I think about a lot, especially when I began making comics, is how do we make this teamwork? Your collaborators are not people that you are like, hey, I wrote this, you draw the pictures just the way I wrote it. Like, no. First of all, where's the fun in that? Second of all, yikes. Your collaborators are your co-creators. You know, the artist who's working on your script should have just as much enthusiasm and input as you are, because they are a co-author of this book. Comics don't exist without the visual element. No one just wants to read the script. So, you know, how can you make sure that the person you're working with gets an equal amount of like input? Because I think the more that they get to influence the work, the more excited they're going to be to work on it. If it just feels like a job where they're, you know, oh, well, I have to draw this person's script, that enthusiasm might not be there. But if you say, hey, how can you, like, what would you like added? Whenever I'm working with an artist, whenever I get the chance, I will reach out in my scripting stage and say, hey, what do you like to draw? What are you enthusiastic about it? Or if it's someone who is really excited for the story, so what part of the story really drew you in? When I worked with Teo on Brooms, and Teo is absolutely incredible, I put so much work into this book. I said, you know, what do you like to draw? What sort of vibe, you know, do you want to like imbue this book with? And what sort of things are like you really enthusiastic about this particular story? And Teo's like, I want to do something super witchy. I want to really celebrate people of color. I want to like focus on, you know, marginalized communities. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I wanted to do anyway. So perfect. Like Luella's character changed not a ton, but like quite a bit from our very first concept, specifically because Teo was working on the book. We have, so Luella is Choctaw and Mexican American. And a lot of that, there's like a whole food scene where she's making tortillas with her father. And that was a direct influence of Teo working on this book. And I think it made the book better. Like it added this huge impactful moment with her family. And then like when we were coming up with the magical runes, some of them in the book look like hand drawn and a little rougher. I drew those and Teo slapped them right in. And then the ones that look super neat and precise, those are Teo's. So you can tell. And then as a writer, especially if you're working in a specific type of setting, if you're working on a specific type of like time period, if you have very specific sci-fi or fantasy elements, provide as many references as you can. Give this person you're working with all the resources that you possibly can so that they have kind of a start base. They're not starting from scratch. They're not trying to like pull images from your mind because they're not in your head. Even if it feels like, oh, I was very clear. You're never as clear as you think you are. Never. You can always be better. And then also give your collaborators a freedom and also like let go of your own ego a little bit, even if it doesn't feel like you have one. Just sort of like let it go. It's there. It's there. And let your collaborators give you their honest input And then after that, take it seriously. Because it's easy to say, oh yeah, you can do whatever you want. And then they mention something, you're like, actually, I think we're going to stick with the way it was. And I know for me, like, I had like, I'll go into a story sometimes, like, especially with Brooms, I had a very specific image in mind of what the story was going to be. And thankfully, everybody who worked on this book was kind of very in line, and we were all agreed on like how we wanted this book to go. But being open to those suggestions from the editor, from Teo, made it only improved the book. I'm so grateful, and that's part of why I love collaborating, because you only have like, no matter how big your imagination is, you're going to have a specific kind of narrow scope that is your view. And having those other people working around you and giving their suggestions and giving their improvements, even if sometimes they're painful to hear, they're necessary, and listen to them, because it'll make a difference, and it'll only improve your work. But yeah, so the images you're actually seeing on here are Teo's character designs from very early on in the project. And I remember when he was sending these, I was just like, yep, no notes. Looks incredible. And trust the people you're working with, because if you're working with them, they know what they're doing. Trust them to know what they're doing, even if it's not exactly the way you imagine it, because it's probably going to be better because they're going to be leaning into their strengths. Yeah, we can move to the next slide. I wasn't done with collaboration. There's more. There's always more. It does not stop at the script stage. It goes beyond actually just the work on page. So as a writer, I'm kind of at the very first step of the entire process of making a comic. I'm at the very beginning. And it is my job, not just to write the story, it is my job to make sure I don't delay everybody else. Every single delay is going to compound to the end. And then some, whoever's back there doing lettering and doing design is going to be suffering because they had to wait. And I do not want to start that domino fall. It's like one of my greatest fears. I'm like, I will get the script in on time because I don't ever want to do that to somebody. And yes, letters. Oh my God. Ariana Mayer, who worked on Brooms, is one of the kindest and most incredible people. And I'm so glad I got to work with her. And do your letters a favor, get your stuff in on time. Or at least communicate well. If there is a delay, because life happens, if there's a delay, like, don't hide it. Don't try and like, they won't notice if I don't tell them, because they will. Everyone will notice if you miss your deadline. You hit those deadlines, or you very clearly communicate as soon as you can that you're not going to be able to, and make sure. One thing that I did was anytime I have a delay on writing, I see if we have time to give the rest of the team an extra bit of space because of my delay. I'm like, I'm sorry, this is happening. I won't be able to turn it on time. I don't want to make anybody crunch. Is there a way we can extend a little bit for them? So just advocating for your team, because sometimes, especially if you're working with larger publishers, the editors, like for Brooms, it was Levine Carito's very first graphic novel. They were not familiar with the process at all. So, I had to make sure that I was going to bat for the artist, because I was like, this is not something that can happen quickly. And I think unless you work in comics, you don't really realize how intense it is. And so, like, writers, if and you're recognizing that an editorial team or anything aren't on top of that and aren't recognizing it, advocate. It's not hard. It costs you nothing to add a line to an email. Oh, right. Sorry, I got a little derailed. Let me look at my own notes on here. Yes. And then when it comes to like, my part, I've written everything. The book is done. I'm like, oh, sweet. The publishers are taking care of the promotion. Wait a minute. What's happened? They didn't name your collaborators on a social media post? Absolutely not. Unacceptable. It's not fair. When we come down to it, the art for a graphic novel is always going to be more work than the writing. That's just a fact. It is more grueling on the body, and it is unfair for an artist to not get just as much credit, if not more, than the writer is getting on social media posts. Because what are people looking at? The cover art. What makes people pick it up? The artwork. Like, I'm confident my story's good, but nobody's gonna know if it's just a blank cover. No one will pick it up. So again, super easy to advocate. Shoot somebody a DM, email your publisher, editor, anybody else who's working on this, or if it's just an indie project, make sure you're tagging people in. It's these things that are super easy to do. I feel like a lot of people might forget them or not realize it's something they should be doing. So it's something that I kind of yell about all the time because of that. Another thing is, say you've been asked to do an interview. Like if I get asked to do an interview for Brooms, I'm like, cool, thank you so much for reaching out. Have you also reached out to Teo? Because sometimes, people focus on author first and not the artist, and you always want to make sure you're drawing that artist in so they're getting just as much sort of publicity because they put years of work into these things. And covers. So again, this comes back to Living Credo, and they were great. I want to say this. I don't want anyone to think Living Credo was lacking at all. They were absolutely fantastic. But again, they were coming from the world of like very traditional big publishers, and they're like, oh, we just need these two names on them. And I was like, but what about the colors? And what about the letter? And oh, the fight. The fight to get all four names on the cover. But I was like, I'm super chill about a lot of things, but I will roll my sleeves up for this. All right, so I'm not dragging on too long. Other things to keep in mind is when you're pitching a project to a publisher or pitching it even to collaborators, think about how you're approaching it. When it comes to, are you pitching with an artist, or are you pitching just as a writer to work with an artist that someone else will sort of grab for you? And because those are going to be different. I always love to try and pitch as a team because I want to know who I'm working with. I like to make sure that I have like a good connection with that artist before I get into a project. And a lot of my writing, I write towards a person's style. And again, I'm going to use Brooms as an example. Brooms has this very like atmospheric vibe. Even though there's a lot of action, there's a lot of like quiet downtime and a lot of emotional scenes. And Teo's artwork was such a perfect fit. And so when I'm writing the script, because I have Teo's artwork in mind, I know what I'm going to be aiming for. I've already chatted with Teo about like what they enjoy, and they're like, well, I don't really want to do a car race. And I'm like, cool. We'll have a maximum of a single page with a car on it. No worries. It's that communication. It's what is the vibe of the story, and does your writing match the art? And do both of you have the same vision of what this is going to look like? And always, 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 how can I make this easier for the rest of the team? Try not to make things difficult. And I feel like maybe that's not the most in-depth of like process, but I feel like for me, when I'm approaching a story, all of these aspects are way more important than like the very specific technicalities of me typing on a computer. Unlike all the art, I can't show you cool thumbnails and color keys. All right, and I think is there one more slide? I'm so sorry, I can't remember. Yes, there is. I also do art. I don't do it very often, but I do art. When I'm laying out my own comics, I do still write a script. It's usually going to be way looser because I don't have to show it to anybody. And I know all my weird notes in my head, so I don't have to worry about like a lot of the specifics that I would put into a script for another artist because I'm like, oh, that's all in there, which then immediately forget half of it. And then I lay out thumbnails. Thank you. I lay out thumbnails with not all the text in them, but at least speech bubbles. And I always try and make the speech bubbles bigger than I think they're going to be. Again, you want to erase text, but sometimes it doesn't happen. So I always try to make the speech bubbles a little bigger than I think they're going to be. So I'm never like having to sort of squeeze art where I thought I had space and I don't end up having space. I like to work in like grayscale usually, so that when I'm zoomed out, I can say, okay, there's way too much black on this area of a page, or there's way too much empty space on this area. So I just work in super simple grayscales. And then when I move on to the actual art, I jump straight from, I cheat a little bit. I tend to jump straight from thumbnails to inks because I'm working digitally. I can just erase any pen marks that I mess up. So I usually just blow up the thumbnail onto the actual like proper size of the page and just get to drawing. Partially because I'm really, really slow, and also I'm really impatient. so, so I'll go straight to like pencil/inks. And then I also, for some reason, I've done a lot of color theory classes, and I still cannot grasp. I admire Blue, and I absolutely admire like Ashanti for being able to do really cool like color keys and all these things going on. I'm just like, listen, you get sepia tones left and right, maybe a spot color. A lot of the stuff that I do for myself, you'll see in like these like shades of brown, which I really enjoy, especially since I do a lot of historical work. And like I love grayscales with spot colors, which is great because it's about the level of my coloring skill. This is why I hire colorists. I know my strengths, and that's not one of them. Yeah, I think let's see, make sure I didn't miss anything. I get distracted. I'm like looking everywhere but at the screen. Yeah. Limited color palettes for those of us who are really bad at color theory. Yeah. And I think that covers most of my process. A lot of it is like, again, outline, outline, outline. I do a ton of outlines to get my scripts done and make sure that they are hitting those exact beats and getting that sort of narrative rhythm that I'm looking for. And then when it comes to actually doing my own art, I try to keep it really simple. Otherwise, I sort of dither around and nothing gets done. So I usually do a lot of short comics, and I try to just like, all right, thumbnails done, inks done, slap on some color, and then I'm like, I have to step away, otherwise it'll never get done. So yeah, I believe that's everything from me. Well, I'll toss it back to Jessi again.
That was wonderful, Jasmine. Thank you so much. I feel like whenever I think about your work in particular, I feel like you and like the script and the art always play so well together. And now I understand why. It's such a collaborative process, and I love hearing about that. Thank you. All right. We are on now to Kody. Kody Okamoto, pronouns they, he. Originally from Hawaii, Kody is a Seattle-based genderqueer cartoonist. He likes to focus on queer narratives and subcultures that have historically been hostile to such experiences, like in pro wrestling and punk scenes. When not working on his long-form webcomic, Keeping Time, Kody can be found singing songs to their cats about how stinky they are. Take it away, Kody.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me to this, Jessi. I'm super excited. When Jessi pitched this panel to us, they invited us to like either talk about our process from start to finish or like to narrow in on just like one section of our process. So today I'm just talking about my Blender Lego sets. uh, so between scripting and thumbnailing and penciling, I've got this intermediate stage, which is probably a lot more convoluted and time consuming than it needs to be, but I thoroughly enjoy it because it feels like I'm playing The Sims, which is creating 3D sets for all of the major locations of my comics. So this is a GIF of like just like one of the main character's apartments. So you can see like I really build it all out with the ability to take away walls and doors when I need to so I can cheat cameras. And yeah, Jessi, I think we can go to the next slide. But like I said, I build sets for all of the major locations. If it's a location that's only gonna appear once, I'll just wing it but for somewhere I know that I'm gonna be drawing several times throughout the course of this, what is probably gonna be an 8 to 10 year long endeavor of a webcomic. If I'm gonna be showing it more than once, I like to take the time up front to figure it all out. So this is the example of one of the main characters, the streets that their family's house is on. And I basically just go into Google Street View into the areas that I don't like to tie my locations down in my comic to one-for-one locations in actual Chicago, but I do like to have a general idea of what neighborhood it's in. So I like to just Google Street View. I'll walk around in Google Street View because I can't be flying to Chicago all the time to take reference photos, even though I would love to if anyone wants to sponsor a trip for me. But uh, and so I'll look at the architecture. I've done a lot of research into sort of the architectural styles and language of Chicago because it is very unique. Um, and I'll use that to build out my sets like this. So I'll use sometimes their 3D models are like they're kit like from kit bashes, so they're already made and they look similar enough to actual the actual Chicago architecture that I can get away with it. And then otherwise, I am starting from scratch using basic geometric shapes to build my own little models. So you can see like just kind of once I've built the street itself, sometimes for the comic panels, I'll recreate the camera angle that I saw in my mind's eye when I was doing thumbnails. So in this one in particular, as far as like the early outline stage, I had a vision of this panel. So I knew when I built this particular Blender set that it was with the goal of getting this shot in mind. And other times, I have a general idea of what I want the panel to look like, but I don't really have a solid of where do I want the camera to be in this panel. And so I'll use Blender and it's take advantage of the ability to actually physically fly around the space and move around and until I find something that is visually interesting and works with the page flow. And yeah, Jessi, you can take us to the next slide. I'm glad I'm last because I don't think my segment's going to be particularly long, so we won't have to go over time too much. But like I said, because I am building sets that are supposedly Chicago, I feel I have a duty to actual Chicagoans to get it as right as I can, which when you ask me what it means is it's getting ridiculously granular about apparently sidewalk widths and like lane sizes. So it's great that all of this information is online. It's mostly on like Chicago City like website. You can kind of find their guidelines for, yeah, if you've got like a 2-lane road, then you need to have this much allowance, which makes it really easy when I'm in Blender to like set my lengths of things to an accurate scale. Because I do notice that like if your scale is off just a little bit when you're working with these 3D models, once you like kind of like take a screenshot of it to bring it into your comic, it's like, oh no, that's why is this doorway like 8 feet tall? Um, but it's really great. It's really fun. Like I said, I really enjoy this part this part of the process because it feels like playing around in The Sims. But instead of The Sims, I'm using royalty-free models that I've bought that I know that my copyright is good for. And it's really fun to not only like build a personality of a street like this, but also of an interior setting. So Jesse, if you want to take us to my final panel, it's really fun. You can see on the left, I've got like a model of the main character's apartment, and it's just I don't know Sims-esque like decorating your little house, picking out props and things that you want to be in their apartment, which I know I could draw these props freehand. I don't necessarily need to go in and put several books on a bookshelf, but I just enjoy it so much. It brings me joy and it takes out some critical thinking skills later. Like I don't have to like sit there and think of like, oh wait, how do I, if my perspective and my vanishing points are here, what are these books gonna look like? I can just, when I'm doing pencils or inks, my brain can shut off a little bit and I can save that energy for the harder parts of the page, like thumbnailing and pencil, character pencils. But it's really fun. It is really fun for me to get in the detail, like in the weeds about like if this apartment is a converted like building that's converted into a living space, how tall would the ceilings be? And if the ceilings are that tall, what would they look like? So I go on like Zillow rental listings for different apartments in Chicago, and you can kind of get a really good sense of like what the actual spaces look like there that you're kind of basing your imagined space on. And I also mentioned that I use the different like stand-in people models to block out how the characters are moving across the space. So you can see all my little character models are visible, but I'll like toggle them on and off their visibility as I am working on my page to keep track of like, okay, they were here, now they're here, now they're moving this way. So it helps my brain to think in this sort of 3D whole setting. Yeah, I love that. It's self-care to let yourself do the Philly bits when the Philly bits are what your brain wants to do. Totally. And yeah, it works for me because I struggle to think spatially without physical like actually looking at something. So this way I've got a visual reference at all times, and it's a visual reference that I built myself like from the ground up. But like I mentioned, I do use a lot of models that I have bought or are royalty free to use. So if folks want to like sort of look into that, um I'm using Blender. A lot of the models you can find them on Acon 3D. I'll type that out actually really quickly, which is like a marketplace for 3D assets that is from South Korea, and I think it was mostly geared towards webtoon artists. Um, and so it's awesome. There's resources out there. Uh, there's also like kitbash.org where you can, I think they've raised their prices now, so I'm not sure if I would recommend that so much. And there's also SketchUp, which I think Blue mentioned. Yeah, and SketchUp has like a 3D warehouse of a lot of like royalty-free assets that people have made. And just like any other niche interest, there are people out there who love to recreate actual buildings and geolocate them in SketchUp. So if you look up, like you can find certain like iconic buildings of like Chicago or Boston or New York, and someone out there has already modeled it and they just did it out of the love of their heart, and it is royalty free for you to use. So, yeah, it's car enjoyers do love creating specific makes and models of cars. So, for for those of us who don't want to be drawing cars, or definitely take advantage of what's out there now. It's so much more than you might think. And if it can save you a little bit of time, a little bit of work up front, can save you a lot of time down the road, I think that it is worth it. And I suggest, like, yeah, let yourself do it. Works a little bit smarter, not harder. I don't know if this is working smarter. It's working Simser. And if working Simser is going to be fun for you like it is for me, hell yeah, let's do it. And I think that's it for me. Thank you, Jessi. I'll toss it back
Thank you,
to you.
Kody. That was very fun. I really enjoyed learning about your Lego sets, and I have started doing something similar for mine, so I can totally understand why you feel the need to get into that beforehand, because I
Once you
also
start
want just a
building,
happy.
yeah, once you start building, it's like, I'm gonna keep going till this is all the way done.
Hell yes. All right. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for speaking with us today. It's been really cool to get a look at each of your processes, and I loved getting to know each of you a bit more throughout this event and in the lead up to. And thank you too to our wonderful NIF organizers, particularly our tech and mod team for today, which is Rivka and Zed. I hope everyone will check out the other upcoming events after this too. And before we get into Q&A, I also want to mention that you can check out Ashanti, Blue, and Kody's work in the NIF Marketplace through the end of this month. And pre-orders are available for Jasmine's The Last Session Volume 2, as well as, Jasmine, please, I forgot to write down the title. Could you say it for us?
Pre-orders are open for The Trader and the Wretch, which
Thank you.
is a illustrated novel.
Yes, and I got it mixed up with Cress and Petra, so it was Cress and the Wretch. I combined yours and Ashanti's. Sorry about that.
The ultimate crossover.
Yeah, right. I would love to watch that happen. But yeah, those are available, and I'm going to put those links into the chat in just a moment. And now we can move to Q&A. Does anybody have any questions for us? And if you do, feel free to come on mic or to share them in the chat. Oh, actually, sorry. Mods, are we allowed to invite people to do that over mic, or did I just kind of do something wrong?
What they should do is they can either put in the chat or do the raise hand feature, and then I can unmute, or actually, I can temporarily unmute, allow people to unmute themselves. Actually, people should be able to unmute themselves.
Then Jessi, I think you've got a Q&A slide too, the final slide.
Oh, that's right. Oh my God. I told myself, remember to scroll, and I forgot. Thank you, Kody.
I got you.
Coming through. Thank you. So I have a few questions, as our panelists have seen earlier, that I can get us started with. How do you set boundaries for yourself with your work? And this is open to everyone.
I'll say when it comes to like work-life balance, I always try and give myself days off. I feel like it's really, really easy, especially in our industry, to just keep working because we're usually doing it at home and it's art and half the time it's fun. But when it's not fun, it's really not fun. And I think just like any other kind of work, you have to take time for yourself away from what you're doing, not only to give yourself some rest and to avoid burnout, but also because it's going to help your creativity.
Yeah, I think one of the things is like I mostly, work on my own, but I also do work freelance. And one of the things is I make sure I take 2 days off a week. And I have my like working hours in my email signature. So I don't have to feel bad when someone like sends me an email about a work interest and it's out of my office. Like if that email comes in, I'm like, you know that I know like my working hours end at 5 p.m. So you don't expect an email from me outside of those hours. Like I'm only going to reply during this window.
That's such a good idea.
Jessi, is it okay if I grab a question from the chat?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Ernest asks, since comics are such a long process, how do you know when you want to commit to an idea? Do you tend to be passionate about an idea before you start, or does the passion come later? I want to speak to that a little bit because I have a lot of different ideas that come to me through random events in my life, and too many ideas to make into comics because comics take a long time to make, and I usually don't commit to developing an idea further unless I feel that that spark of excitement, which I think is has for me been very difficult to locate in myself for a long time until recently with a project that I've started. But I think it also for me depends a little bit on what the purpose of the idea is, if that makes sense. Like, what is the context in which I'm working with this idea, or what is the context in which or for which I am thinking about this as a comic. For example, is this a personal project, a webcomic that I'm going to do for myself as a passion project? If so, then it needs to just be so exciting to me. It needs to just spark so much joy, so much excitement, so much eagerness and energy to work on it that I continue doing so, regardless of financial incentive or other things I have to juggle. If I'm thinking about it as like, this is an idea that might be good for a published graphic novel, that's a little bit of a different context than um, a passion project. And therefore, the qualifiers or requirements that the idea has to meet within myself and my reactions to it, the passion for it, are different. So something for a that I'm pitching, for example, might not have that passion attached to it. But I think that I think that this is a good idea. I think that I can execute it well. I think that it's suitable and will excel in this context. Um, but that's a little bit also to Jessi's question about like work separation and like boundaries in a way. Because I work full time as a cartoonist and illustrator, there are some projects that are not really for me, and they're like that I'm doing, and that I have to budget time for. And there are projects that are just for me because if I don't have those projects, uh, I'm gonna get super depressed and angry. So I've got to have my mental health projects, which have to be ones that I'm really passionate about.
Emotional support comics.
Exactly.
Ashanti, can I hop on that question as well? Because some stuff you said made me think of some things as well. Something that has been consistent with many of my projects is that there is like a single component or maybe like a couple like related components that like I can't stop thinking about, and that the comic making process is almost like a form of exorcism. Like I have to work on this to get this out of my system, and working on that idea as a way to like process it and give it some like additional thought. Something that has developed for me over time is an understanding of like how to examine and analyze the thing that I'm really passionate about, and like figuring out why it works, or like what is appealing about it for me. Is it appealing to other people, and is this why? And a lot of times like I am better at recognizing when an idea needs a little more time to cook, or if it's like missing a fundamental component that helps make it coherent as an idea. This actually happened fairly recently with Bleed Any Percent, which was an idea I've had since 2022. I had this idea of like a speedrunner who does like augmented reality stuff. I had some ideas about where I wanted to set it. I was really interested in this real place that exists in Toronto called the Toronto Path. I'd been there a few times before, so I knew it. And there were some things that I could do virtually, like there are YouTubers who have like documented like the Toronto Path. I could look at maps. So I sort of knew the crunchy logistics of like where this person might go and what they might experience. But there were some key elements that I felt like were missing. So the next time I went to Toronto that next year, I got to like, I went in with a purpose and I examined details and I tried to focus on things that were like not 100% there in my memory. And I was able to capture and recognize visuals that like cemented some ideas and visual metaphors that were like 80% there. And that allowed me to visualize the thing as a complete story. And that gave me the push I needed to finish. But I sort of needed to have recognized this is what it needs. I don't have this yet. I have to do this to accomplish it. And that's a skill that you develop over time that comes from the passion first, but also like looking at something analytically.
Completely. And just to add on to that again, there's a project that I have in development, and I say in development very loosely, that I'm profoundly, deeply, excruciatingly passionate about. And I know I'm not going to get to it for another 10 years, maybe 5, 10 years, because it's not ready. I have complete and total faith in it as probably, hopefully one day my greatest work, but I'm not ready for that yet. Like I need to cook me a little more, and the project needs to cook a little more before I'm ready to tackle it, for a number of reasons. And I think that if you have an idea that you're really, really, truly passionate about, then that passion is going to stay even if you shelve it for a little while. Like it's not something that you have to do right now. If it's a project that you recognize needs a little bit more time, it's okay to be patient with it and with yourself. Jumping right into it can be really beneficial for certain projects. It's all about what you need and what the project needs and what your relationship to the work is. But it's also, if it's a project with that needs to take longer and needs to cook for longer and simmer for longer, the passion is just going to grow when you get to it. So yeah, but I think to also touch on the very last point of Ernest's question, personally, I've never had a project where the passion came later in the project. Usually the process of comics is so long that I need all the passion up front, because otherwise it's kind of like dragging my feet a little bit. Like, do I really care about this? I've been working on these pages for 600 hours or whatever, cumulatively. So that's just me though.
I really appreciate that.
I saw one other question that was, you were all very orderly storytellers. How do you integrate unexpected changes with the systems that you use? I guess it depends on how big the change is. Like if I'm really far down the line and there's some massive change someone asked me to do that will like destroy half of it, I'm like, sorry, we've come too far. Like you've already said yes too many times to this particular type of story plot. But otherwise, a lot of it is rolling with the punches. And I think that goes for comics in general, unless it's something that's just going to be catastrophic. Like it's going to be just destroy everything you've built up to this point. And sometimes it's necessary. But otherwise, yeah, stuff happens all the time where oftentimes I'm writing, and when I go from one of my many outline stages to the next, oftentimes I end up in places very different from my very initial not so much from the idea, but from like the way that I had tried to pace something at the very beginning, which is part of why I like to do so many outlines. Because yeah, it will sometimes stray, or I'll do a piece of research that negates half of what I was writing, and I have to go back in and say, all right, how do we adapt this? And I think that's part of the fun of the process, is it doesn't go exactly the way you planned at the beginning, and you find a lot of really cool stuff that makes the story better.
I feel like, especially when I'm setting up a house, when I'm confronted with the reality of physics, that tends to change a lot of my plans in particular. Just like, oh, yeah, that's not going to work. We'll find a way to make it work in a different way. I did have a question as well. What advice would you have for cartoonists, whether it's all-encompassing or perhaps focusing on something like lettering, when they're trying to figure out their own process? I feel like sometimes there's like a lot of lack of knowledge about how much work goes into it, even if you make comics yourself. And sometimes there's this fixation on, I have to have my process figured out from the beginning. What do I do? What would y'all say to that?
Since I'm primarily in the webcomic space now, I see the sentiment a lot where folks want to start a webcomic, but they're like, I have to get good at X, Y, and Z before I can start. And I feel like my advice there is you're gonna get good at X, Y, and Z by starting, so just start. And if something in your process, if it feels like pulling teeth, if you feel like, oh, watched this specific tutorial or I took this class and it told me I have to do it this way, so I'm forcing myself to work in this specific way and it doesn't feel great, then try something else. Like it's okay. Like you don't have to work like me or Ashanti, or like you don't have to work like any of us on this panel. Just if it feels like it's working for you, then that's probably the right way for you to do it.
Yeah, I would hop on that too, because I feel like there is a pressure to have a very refined process. Or honestly, I feel like, especially in web comics, where a lot of people have moved over to digital tools, there's kind of a belief that digital tools or something with a lot of bells and whistles is like the best way to refine your process in every single way. And for some people, that's true. But I mean, sometimes you just find a tool that works and gets the job done, and that's what you need. For me, this works with writing, where some people get a lot of success from tools like Scrivener or things that help them like plan documents. I literally, for I think every project I've worked on since 2012, I have started by opening a TXT file and just writing, because it's so no frills. That kind of is what helps get words on the page, and that's what makes it work for me. So like it's okay to use something that's like kind of funky or kind of wonky if it gets you results.
To add on to that, like I do all my scripting, all of my scripting by hand in a notebook. Like I have a new, I don't type anything on the computer until I'm ready to edit it. And I have to transcribe the entire notebook. And I do this for graphic novels too. Like all 250 something pages of my graphic novel are in a notebook that's like this big, and I had to transcribe all of it because I can't draft on the computer. And I know that about myself. Some people can, and I'm not one of them. So I wasn't able to I wasn't able to learn how I want to work until I tried some things that didn't work. And then I thought, that was kind of painful, a little bit excruciating, like pulling teeth. And so I didn't do it again. I did something else until I found what worked for me. And similarly, I think it's really valuable to think about not just in like an abstract way, but like try something, then reflect on it. Try something, then reflect on it. Think about what is comfiest for your brain and your hand in the different stages that you're working with, whatever those are. Because some people are like, yeah, I need my pencils to be super, super like a distinct stage before I go to my distinct stage of inks, before I go to my distinct stage of flats and then colors. Some people are like, yeah, I draw my layouts in my sketchbook, and then I work digitally, so I scan them in, and then I ink right on top of them, and then and that's cool. That's great. All of these different processes are ones that people have found because they've tried different things that didn't work for them and did work for them and didn't and did. So it's really like trial and error is, I think, something that you have to embrace if you're going to try comics because it's so deeply individual. Like, even though there is the traditional assembly line style process of like different stages that have been carefully delineated, that doesn't mean anything. It's like totally arbitrary for most people working in comics these days. And one last thought for me is it also can depend on the project. Like, it should probably depend on the project a lot of the time, what you want to have be part of your process. And I think the most important part of kind of figuring out your process loadout, so to speak, is how do you have the most fun as a person working on your comic? Like, whether you're tackling a specific role or stage of the process, or whether you're just like, no, I'm a cartoonist, I'm doing all of it. Like, are you having fun? How much fun are you having? Could you be having more fun? Are there things that you could be cutting out that bring you agony, or things that you could be adding in that bring you joy and excitement and energy and motivation? Like, with my current personal project, I decided, I'm not going to do digital. I'm going to pencil everything digitally, and then I'm going to paint my pages analog with watercolor, gouache, and like ink. And I'm just going to have fun because that's what I want to do. And I'm not on a deadline for it. So I think just ascertain your situation and the context and circumstances around it. And then like Professor Utonium, put in chemical X, except it says fun.
I love that, Ashanti.
I think the only thing I would add would be make your process sustainable for yourself. It's going to be long. Comics take a long time, even short ones. And I think the trick is finding what works best for you to keep you moving forward without doing damage to yourself. If doing thumbnails, then pencils, then inks and colors isn't working for you and you end up quitting halfway through because it's just not sustainable, find a way to make that process faster. If that means cutting out steps, if that means you're not as precise as other people, okay, that becomes part of your style. And I think these are things that you learn as you the more you do comics, because the people who are, if you're looking at people who are like putting out tutorials or explaining their process, they've done probably a lot that you haven't seen because there were some maybe not some great ones early on. But these are people who've already kind of like refined what works for them. And so the trick is finding what works best for you and what's going to keep things moving in your process. If there's a certain step that is stalling you out every single time and you just can't seem to get past it, that means you just got to find a new avenue to get through it. Otherwise, you're going to keep stalling out every single time you hit those steps. So find something that works for you, that's sustainable, that you're going to feel good about doing again and again and again, because comics is doing things a million times. Yeah.
That is true. And I feel like that's one of the things that I've loved the most about being in the co-op is I've just learned how not much of a weirdo I am when I thought I was with certain things. And I think it has helped me to appreciate that it's okay to slow down and take my time with the parts that are the most important to me or that make the work easier for me later on, and making sure I take care of my body and my mind as well when I'm making comics. So this has been a really wonderful conversation. And I think since it's already 2:34 our time, I'm going to say that's a great place to stop. And I just want to say thank you all again so much for doing this. I really, really enjoyed this process with you. And I'm going to be reading much more of your work again. And everybody, please check out the NIF Marketplace as well. And Rivka, back to you.
I think you already wrapped it up, Jessi. There's nothing left. So thank you all for being here. If in the comments, or if you want, guys, you want to mute yourselves or whatever, please thank our guests, our wonderful guests, for being here. It was a wonderful show. And I hope all of you guys got to see the comments as they were going, because it was wonderful seeing your work and sharing and your process. This was phenomenal. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
So much. Thanks for having us. Thanks for coming out, everyone.
Yeah,
yes, thank you. I loved seeing the chat too. Everybody's very engaged and excited.
Shout out to the chat. Thanks,
For
guys.
real.
Arts.
This is wonderful.
Here we go.
Is this a new way of doing it? I'm old.
Oh, the little finger hearts.
Wait, what?
Hearts.
Yeah, if you ask
hearts.
some like teenagers how to make a heart with their hands, they'll do this. They don't. This is
No,
this
I
is
know
old.
funny.
this is
This is
passe,
old
but there's
people.
like another way I've seen people do it.
Oh,
I
yeah,
don't
like
remember.
This.
It's like
My son
yeah.
had like 3
Yeah.
hearts or something.
Yeah,
This
it's
is a
something
perfect
like
way
this.
to
I
end the
can't get
panel.
it.
All us olds trying to figure it
Right.
out.
Alrighty, folks. Well, thank you again for being here, and I hope everyone has a great day. And our next event will be here at 4 o'clock, the History of Comics Labor Organizing. So see everyone then. Bye.
Bye. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
See you later.